The former Danish Prime Minister Helle Thorning-Schmidt began her New Year's speech like this. Good evening. A Thursday in December, I sat on the floor in a living room in Valby. I had Holger, who is 6 months old, on my lap. I was visiting the mothers group. And is there anything more life-affirming than being pulled in the nose by a curious baby? Children are lovely. They are the most important thing that we have. If we're asked what really matters for us in life, most of us will answer our children. I certainly will. But our children are not just important to their parents and grandparents. They are our common future. You may notice that the Prime Minister's speaking style is very close to everyday language. She speaks in short sentences, she tells a personal anecdote, and she displays emotion. She has a rather simple language with a plain vocabulary and a loose sentence construction. And she's not afraid of stating a banality such as children are lovely. This is a very good example of something that Peggy Noonan, speechwriter for Ronald Reagan, has said about modern speechwriting. The modern egalitarian impulse has made politicians leery of front and high rhetoric. Attempts to find the right if sometimes esoteric quote or allusion seem pretentious. They don't really know what the common man knows anymore. They forget that we've all had at least some education, and a number of us read on our own and read certain classics in junior high and high school. The guy at the gas station read Call of the Wild, which is a novel by Jack London, when he was 14 and sometimes thinks about it. Moreover, he has imagination. Politicians forget they go in lowest common denominator. I think that Peggy Noonan is right. Today, public speaking is predominated by this egalitarian impulse, which is an impulse in speechwriting to make a formal speech sound like everyday language. Rhetorical critics have named it the conversational style. And in our culture, the high value of conversational style is common sense. But I agree with Michael Billig that it's the critic's obligation to criticize common sense. So in this presentation, I will critically discuss the conversational style and point the attention to another style with another function. A grander style of oratory, a more traditional kind of eloquence, which is a source of creating interesting and inspiring speeches that modern speechwriters seem to have forgotten or at least neglected for some time. Let's have a look at some of the formal characteristics of the conversational style. Basically, it's a simulation of everyday speaking, a relaxed vocabulary, colloquial expressions, dead metaphors, truisms, loosely constructed sentences, and avoidance of subordinate clauses. Today, when professional speechwriters want to create a personal style for their clients, they refer to the speakers and the listeners in first-person pronouns, you, I. They use informal contractions, your, we're, and they use conjunctions at the beginning of sentences. And is there anything more life-affirming? Professional speechwriters use these traces of everyday language to add listenability to a speech and to create a sense of relationship between speakers and their listeners. Conversational style is used to characterize the speaker and to make the speaker seem like a human being. In the old rhetoric, this creation of dramatic character was called Ethopoeia. In his exercise on Ethopoeia, Aftonius advises his students to develop the characterization of the speaker in a clear, concise, and fresh style. Dionysius of Halicarnassus recommends the use of clear and ordinary words. Dionysius praises the logographer Lysias for his loosely constructed sentences and a natural, spontaneous sounding composition. For this artlessness is itself the product of art. The relaxed structure is really under control, and it is in the very illusion of not having been composed with masterly skill that the mastery lies. Aristotle notes that artificial sounding composition makes listeners resentful as at someone plotting against them. We may conclude that the use of conversational techniques to compose a speech that seems like the speaker's own language is as old as rhetoric itself. The new thing, however, that there has in the last century been an actual transformation of public communication to a less formal mode of address. In Eloquence in an Electronic Age, Kathleen Jamieson argues that modern speeches are conversational rather than oratorical. The old eloquence, which spoke in metaphors of battle and fire, was contentious, passionate, and intense. Today, speakers who still try to conquer and inflame are as anachronistic as the amphitheater and the aqueduct. The conversational style thrives in the last half of the 20th century, the age of television, but the change from traditional oratory to a less formal mode of speaking has a long time coming. As early as in 1917, James Winans notes how uncomfortable the modern man is with the old high style in speechwriting. He says that in the ancient world, pleaders in court might dramatically bear their scars, and the young children of a defendant might be exhibited with the open intent of winning sympathy. These methods have not entirely lost vogue, but they can rarely be used so openly with good effect. The modern man, and especially the American and Englishman, though emotional enough, dislikes direct appeals to his feelings. According to Jamieson, this development culminates with the American President Ronald Reagan. Reagan uses a conversational style to fit the constraints of the TV. Instead of addressing his audience as a crowd in a public space, he creates an intimate atmosphere. He speaks in a low voice and addresses his audience in the familiar surroundings of their living room. By using self-revelation and displaying feelings, he's constituted as genuine and empathic. He is a leader that the people can identify with. Jamieson interprets this style ideologically. The style performs some of the basic values in Reagan's political philosophy, such as common sense and trust in the people. Following this line of thinking, Branham and Barnett Pearce have made the conversational style the object of power critique. They argue that when speakers allude to conversational settings and relationships, for instance when they speak about themselves or make eye contact with individual listeners, they create an illusion of intimacy and conversation, not a genuine dialogue. According to Branham and Barnett Pearce, the broadly inclusive conversational frame, with all its intimations of intimacy and identification, generally conceals and reinforces power. Because their relations with their audiences are not truly dialogical or egalitarian, the conversational frame serves to obscure rather than to dismantle the hierarchical relationship between speakers and listeners. If we consult standard handbooks on speechwriting, we find general advice such as the more formal the occasion, the less you can rely on conversational language. But I think we need to draw on some of the insights from the ideology critique. In addition to the functional advice, speechwriters and rhetorical critics need to consider the constitutive aspects of style. What kind of power relations does the style constitute? What kind of politics does the style perform? Besides, I think it's a huge exaggeration to pronounce high oratory dead. Traditional eloquence exists today, and all of us who teach style and rhetorical figures, we know where to find the good examples. For instance, in Kennedy's speeches or in Earl Spencer's funeral oration to his sister, Lady Diana. Earl Spencer announced Diana to be the very essence of compassion, duty, style, and beauty. He called her a symbol of selfless humanity, a standard bearer for the rights for the truly downtrodden, a very British girl who transcended nationality. Diana was someone with a natural nobility who was classless. Just like the conversational style, high oratory has a rhetorical function. Earl Spencer's rhetorical strategy was to transcend Diana to the very principle of good in order to blame both the royal family and the press. Also, Kennedy's speeches, especially when penned by the Danish descendant Ted Sorensen, are considered a high point in 20th century public speaking. In his inaugural, he used anti-metaboly to capture the complex political climate as a power struggle that still allowed vision and hope for a better future. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. My point is that we do not just have one stylistic ideal, we have at least two, both a conversational style and a more traditional kind of oratory. Both stylistic ideals are strategic and purposeful, both argue and perform. And if they're contrasted, the difference in constructions of leader, audience, and values are evident. In Reagan's conversational style, presence and identification constitute the audience as individual interlocutors. The leader is constituted as a human being, and practical solutions are some of the highest political values. In Kennedy's more eloquent mode of speaking, the audience is constituted as a unity, the people, and the leader is idealistic and visionary. To a rhetorician, this distinction between two stylistic repertoires, a grand and a plainer, seems rather familiar. We know it, of course, from the teachings of the three levels of style, the grand, the middle, and the simple style. Apart from the middle style, there's much resemblance between this old theory and the modern distinction between eloquence and conversational style. Just like the conversational style, the simple style is not only distinguished by its simple everyday language, but also by the topics that are common and belong to the practical everyday life. The author of Rhetorica at Herennium stresses that if the speaker is not to bore his audience, he must combine different stylistic modes. So it seems that our urge to distinguish stylistic repertoires is as old as rhetoric itself. This contrasting of style is productive because it makes us think about what we do with language and what we want to do. And I think that is exactly what we need to do today. Thanks to the all-pervading conversational style, too many speeches are boring, overly familiar, pseudo-egalitarian, and plain. We need to improve our public speaking, and the least we can do is to consider some of the available means of persuasion. We're not forced to bore the audience with tedious accounts of everyday language. A speechwriter can actually make the speaker formulate ideas and visions in a language that shines and excites. So to end this presentation, I will give the word to Reagan's speechwriter Peggy Noonan once more. Speeches are not significant because we have the technological ability to make them heard by every member of our huge nation simultaneously. Speeches are important because they are one of the great constants of our political history. For 200 years, from "Give me liberty or give me death" to "Ask not what your country can do for you," they have been not only the way we measure public men, They have been how we tell each other who we are. Thank you very much.